Hello and welcome to the Draft to Digital Spotlight. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, but you can call me Mark to Digital, and I'm excited that we're going to be taking a book break. We're going to go behind the pages. We're going to get insights on marketing and all kinds of other delicious stuff associated with books with Melissa. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
So I've got to get back into your love of books and your passion for books. Where did it all come from?
So I was always a reader growing up. I loved them right off the bat. And when I was going to college, I actually jumped into publishing my freshman year of college and started working in movie publishing. And then after that, I went and worked for a publisher right out of college. So I started right off the bat, really. And I got into marketing and PR and worked with the media, and I just love it.
So I know you've got some great tips for writers, especially writers that are going to be using visual media like we're doing today. Uh,
Yeah.
tell me about the Book Break, this awesome show.
Yeah. So on the show, I interview authors, illustrators, actors, narrators, publishers, all kinds of people in the book industry. So it's a place for readers to go and learn something about their favorite authors, but it's also a place for authors to go and get some tips from other people that have experience in the industry. So it's really fun.
That is really, really cool. And when did you start the Book Break? You're on what, season 3 now, I think?
Yes, we're on season 3. And Mark, you were on actually my season 1. So thank you very much.
I was honored.
Yes, and I'm glad I was honored, really. So it was like a work for a while before we ever aired it. So we started it out with one of my friends named Tony Toscano on his TV network called Flashback TV. And we originally had the idea of doing a book show, and it was originally going to be about 30 minutes long. And over time, we decided to cut it back and make it a short break. That's why we went with the book break, because it's about 10-ish minutes long. And it runs in between on Flashback TV, it runs in between movies. And then online, of course, you can find it on YouTube and Facebook and all over the place, on my website, on thebookbreak.com, and all of that. So we were in the works trying to figure out the show for a good 6 to 9 months before we aired the first episode. And the first episode aired the beginning of 2019. So we're a little over a year now and into season 3.
Oh, wow. So how do you do the seasons? Is it based on actual, well, I don't know. It's not based on years.
That's a
It's
good
based
question.
on what sort of season calendar are we using here?
Right. Okay, so that's a really funny question. So in TV, normally you have a season that is 13 episodes, sometimes it's 26 episodes, but that's normal, right? But then you have tons of shows that don't follow the normal standard. And so sometimes they're 22 or 23 or 17, random. So I decided to not follow the normal standard either. So what we did is pretty much, like, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but we basically just went, that's a lot of episodes. Cut. Next episode is season 2.
Oh, really? Okay.
So that's actually what we did. And the other thing with it was we were getting into fall. So we went, okay, so usually TV shows run from like spring to fall, fall through winter, and then you start over again in spring. So now that we've said that, we're getting close to summer, which means we're probably going to be wrapping up season 3 and going into season 4. So think about it as they follow the seasons of the year.
Okay, cool. And we can binge watch too because it's all available online.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you can for sure.
That's exciting. So let's talk about authors because you go out, you hit the street, you're at conferences and cons,
Yeah.
and you're interviewing authors in bookish locales as well. What are some of the things that authors need to be aware of before they, I guess, make themselves ready for prime time or ready for the screen?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the things that I like to do is, one, I kind of catch people off guard. But two, I like them to plan when possible, right? So when I'm at like a comic convention, for example, I am kind of doing it on the spot with some people. Now, some of them I have to for sure plan far in advance, but sometimes it's just, hey, I've got 10 minutes, you've got 10 minutes. Let's just jump on. But one of the things that I do is give them an introduction before we start. So like this interview that you and I are doing is a little different because I am looking at the camera and looking at the screen, but when you're being interviewed, you don't look at the camera most of the time. So this goes not just for my show, but if you are going on a local TV station, for example, and being interviewed, don't look at the camera. The biggest thing that you do is you ignore the camera. Your conversation is with your host, and that's it. Now, if it's an intro or an outro, meaning I'm saying, thanks for joining us on the book break, we'll see you next time, it would make sense then for you to look at the camera because it might feel awkward to look at me while I'm talking at the camera, right? So that's fine. You can look at the camera then.
If I go like this, I'm looking at you, right? That's how it goes.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So that's a good time. Another thing to do is always act as if it's live, even if it's not. So we are actually live right now, but most of the time when I'm doing interviews or when you're on an interview with a TV station, most of the time it's not live, but they film it as if it's live, meaning they're not going to stop and cut and edit if they don't have to. So be prepared for that. If you are an author, always bring a book with you. So TV is very visual, shows are very visual. If you have a physical book that you can show, that's excellent. The other tip is anytime you're going on a show, if the producer asks you to send them images, send them the images. I can't tell you how many times I've done shows and I've asked someone to send me images and then they never do. And I end up having to have my editor go and hunt them down. And that's kind of just more time consuming than it needs to be. And I guarantee the images that you send the producer are going to be better than what we find. Because what we find, we're probably only getting low resolution images and then your cover is kind of pixelated. But if you send us the images, then they look much crisper and clearer. So bring your book and send images.
Now, I remember one time before when you were giving me advice and we were talking about images, you said there's a methodology to the images, that you don't just provide the high resolution images, but you provide notes that can potentially match when you're talking about certain items?
Yes, great question. This is one of my favorites. So actually, literally right before I came on this show, I was doing a Mother's Day gift book recommendation segment on a local show here where I live, which is in Utah in the US. And I provide them a list of questions and things that I'm going to talk about. So with that, those are called talking points. Now, if you wanted to be on my show on the book break, I would love you to give me suggested questions. Love it. Now, I do go off the top of my head, and I've been doing it long enough that I'm pretty good at that. But if I can read things that you want to talk about ahead of time, then there's a much higher probability of me talking about those things. Now, if I'm grabbing you in a con and I don't have questions because, hey, you just met me 5 seconds ago, I obviously don't expect that. But I do ask you, hey, is there anything that you want me to ask you?
Emily is at front door.
So that's definitely something to think about. Anytime you're interviewed, what are some things that you would like to talk about? And give those suggestions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So before we get, that's awesome. We're already there. We've got the interview booked. What do you recommend to authors who are looking to actually get on maybe it's a television program, maybe it's a radio program, maybe it's even a podcast? Because I imagine it's somewhat similar, right? The way you would approach. So, hi, Melissa. My name's Mark, and I'd like to be on your show. Like, what advice would you give to me for that?
Do that little dance. First of all, send me a video of that because that will for sure do it. Sorry, I have to joke. Okay, so kind of similar to what I just said is you're going to suggest ideas for your interview. Now, first, you're going to want to find the story. So The fact that you have a book published is not the story.
Okay.
I was just talking with somebody yesterday about this who has an incredible backstory. And that's what I was getting at with her was, what's your backstory? Or what is it that makes you unique? Why is your product different from everyone else's out there? And that's what you need to think about. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. First, know the show that you're pitching. If you're pitching a cooking show and your book has nothing to do with cooking, that's not the show for you to pitch. If your book actually does have something to do with cooking, great. Tie it in. So number one, know the show that you're pitching, know what kind of stories they like to do, what kind of interviews they like to do. Number two, tell them how you are better or different from anyone else. Now, this is where some people feel a little awkward because you don't necessarily want to go and say, hi, I'm the best author you're ever going to meet. Put me on your show, right? That's hard to do. So you don't have to say you're better, but you do have to say you're different. And from a producer standpoint, I like to know you're better. So if you're not comfortable saying that, then have someone else say it for you, right? And that's where you can give quotes that other people have said. This is a great opportunity for you to toot your own horn, but in a humble-ish way. But honestly, you don't really have to be humble. You just have to be kind, right? And so find the story that's different. And if you don't know what that is, find a tie-in anywhere you can. What's going on in current events? What is going on with holidays? Anything that you can tie in. What's your backstory? If you wrote a book about some historical event, tie that in. If you write military sci-fi and you used to be in the military, talk about that. How did you go from being an Army Ranger to writing military sci-fi books, right? Those are some of the interesting things. On one of my shows a few weeks back, I interviewed Jonathan Mayberry. And you know Jonathan, right? And so anyone that knows Jonathan knows he is a super interesting guy, super interesting. And I found out for the first time back in February that Jonathan is I'm probably going to say this wrong, so he can tell me I did it wrong later, but I think he's like a 7th or 8th or 9th degree black belt in jujitsu. And he used to be a bouncer at a club, and like, he's got all kinds of fighting background. And that's why Jonathan Mayberry's fight scenes are awesome. Like, to me, that's so cool. You are a jujitsu master? Yeah, that sets you apart from other authors writing fight scenes. So find what sets you apart, and that's the story that you pitch.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, and Jonathan also knows his cocktails really, 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 really well. He's an expert in so many things, not just a master writer.
Yeah.
So a lot of writers are introverts, right? So they're happier behind the keyboard and they're hammering out stories and just not wanting to be in front of the camera.
Yes.
What sort of advice would you offer to an author who is maybe even forced into a situation, or you're approaching their booth at a con and suddenly you've got a camera? What do you advise how they can kind of ease into that?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm going to give you a long answer, sort of, kind of twofold. Okay. So first, I will tell you that if you are truly uncomfortable in front of a camera, you don't have to do it. So this happened when I was at the Salt Lake City FanX. I approached an author who was at Bard's Tower. And for any of you that go to cons, you probably see Bard's Tower at all of the, comic conventions and Dragon Con and all of that, right? And they've got great authors there. And I approached him and asked him if I could interview him. And he was awesome because he was super straightforward with me. And he said, you know what? I would be so uncomfortable in front of the camera. I really don't want to do it. And I was totally respectful of that. I'm like, you know what? I get it. No problem. Thank you. So number one, don't be afraid to say no. If you are really, really uncomfortable with it and you don't think you can do it, it's okay to say no. So now, if you want to try it, what are some things can you do to be prepared? So I'm going to talk about branding for a second. When you go to these conferences, dress to your brand. right? So let's talk about James Owen. He is super good at branding. I don't think I've ever been to a conference where James is there and he's not wearing a vest, right? That's a part of his brand. So when you go to these conferences, what is your author brand, right? And like, are you the author that always has blue hair? I think every time I see Jim, he does have blue hair, actually. Jim Butcher, sorry,
Lately,
Jim
yeah.
Butcher. And if you don't have an author brand, think about it, because that's a part of establishing who you are as an author. There is a huge amount of things that go into your brand, but one of those things is your appearance. So every time you go somewhere, dress as if you are going to be on camera, because maybe you're not going to be on a TV show, but chances are someone's going to want to take a picture of you, right? So be true to your brand. Now, if you're really struggling with talking to people, practice. And practice in your car, practice in front of your mirror, practice. So I have heard many authors get in front of their mirror and practice, but I also hear them doing it while they're driving. Some have told me they like to do it in the shower because then no one can hear them, right? So if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want my spouse to hear me, they're totally going to make fun of me. Maybe they won't hear you if you do it in the shower, right? So practice. So practice talking, practice a script. So if you have given questions to the interviewers, and that would be, you know, ahead of time, practice those answers. Now, if you have a situation where someone like me walks up to you and says, hey, can I interview you for my show? And you can do it, which if you can, guys, I do recommend you say yes, if you can, right? So you should practice a pitch for your books. If I walk up to you at a conference and I say, what's your book about? I want you to have a 10-second answer for me, not 30 seconds. Give me 10 seconds. Give me a sound bite. I may ask you a follow-up question, and that may make it longer, but give me a sound bite. Now, this is going to go the same thing if you're pitching an agent, for example, and you get in front of them, or you're doing any kind of pitch session. You need to be able to say what your book is about in a short amount of time. So if you don't have a pitch about your book, write one and memorize it and practice it. If you don't have a pitch about who you are as an author, write it down, memorize it, and practice it, so that no matter where you are, if somebody asks you a question, whether it be a fan in a line or somebody with a camera or someone with a microphone, you at least have two things memorized: what's your book and what it's about, and who are you as an author.
That's awesome. Sort of two follow-up questions related to that. And this is just for people who may not understand, but my book is so long and it's 300,000 words and I have this trilogy and all of these things going on. How could I possibly dumb it down to 10 seconds? Shouldn't it be at least 5 minutes? Like, what do you say to that sort of response?
It should not be 5 minutes. So if you have someone interviewing you, or even you just have somebody say, hey, what's your book about? If you try to talk for 5 minutes, you have lost them for sure by 30 seconds.
Okay.
But you're probably going to lose them sooner than that. Now, typically you start to lose people around 15 to 20 seconds, which is why I actually say practice it for 10 seconds, right?
Okay.
Give yourself the buffer zone, because you start to lose them around the 15 to 20 second mark. Now, if you have somebody that has a really long attention span, they might make it to the 30-second mark. But if I ask you what your book is about, you need to be able to say it in what we call a sound bite. Give me a sound bite, a quick snippet. Think about how long commercials are on TV. 15 seconds, 30 seconds.
Right, that's true. Okay. And so it's basically that attention span. And then potentially, if that's interesting, then they'll want to get into a little bit more depth. They'll want to ask more probing questions, etc. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm just going to pop up. I couldn't resist popping up a comment that this is great information, Jamie says. Love it. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Jamie.
But so the next follow-up question I was going to ask was, so if I practice it so well that I know it inside and out, what are some strategies that I might use so that it doesn't sound like I'm a robot just regurgitating something for the 100th time? Right. So, because it's so well known that it's like, and this is what happens next, or whatever, right? Like, how do you get around that?
Yeah. So when you memorize it, what you're doing is getting that information in your head so that you are saying it naturally, but it doesn't actually have to be word for word, right?
Okay.
So when you're practicing it, I want you to practice it word for word. But what happens in the moment is it goes to your subconscious, right? So your subconscious is now pulling out that information. So without even thinking, that's coming out as a sentence, right? It's instantly coming out. Now, if you want to get into like making sure you have it word for word, now there are times when I'm doing a show and I really do need to say something word for word. And that just becomes part of the practicing of it, where when you practice it as if you are saying it, right? So you're not reading it. You need to get off script, as we say, as soon as you can, because that's when it starts to sound more natural. Whenever you're reading it, it's not going to sound as natural. So when you get off script, that just means you have the information in your head and you're just talking to somebody. So if you ask me a question like right now, this is just information I have in my head. I don't have notes in front of me of what I should be saying. It's just because I have this information. It's going to be the same way for you. Once you get it memorized and you say it enough, when someone asks you, it's going to come out really easily.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. So I want to kind of move in a slightly different direction. It is related to that. Is what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see authors make when it comes to the marketing of either their books or themselves?
The biggest mistake I see an author make with marketing. All right, the first one is before your book's ever published, and that's the cover. Number one thing that sells your book is your book cover. If you are not experienced at doing book covers, please, I beg of you, do not do your own book cover. And so I see right now authors in their head going, but I don't have $800 to buy a book cover. That's okay if you don't have $800 to buy a book cover. There are a lot of other options out there that you can go to that are professional looking, and you don't have to spend that kind of money to do it. But I promise you, if you don't spend the money on a good cover, you may as well not publish your book. I know that's harsh, guys. I know it's harsh, but hear me out. What's the point of publishing a book that no one's going to buy? And if you don't have a good cover, unless it's your mom, you're not going to sell as many books, right? So number one, get a good cover. Now, if you're going with someone else that's making the cover for you, they need to give you more than one option, all right? One option isn't enough. Now, before you ever even have someone make the cover, do research. Do your research. What else is out there? What's selling? What's not selling? And how do you know that? I almost want to feel like I'm in a class. Anybody want to raise your hand? How do you know that? How do you do research, guys? All right. Well, since I can't see your hands, I'll go ahead and answer that. Go online.
You see my hand. I'll put mine up.
Mark. Wait, you can't see my finger.
How do you do that?
Thank you. Mark, good question. So go online to an online book retailer and search their website. So a lot of these online book retailers, you can see their bestseller lists. You can see what's selling. If you do a search and you type in best-selling horror book, what comes up? If you do a search for your genre and you type in best-selling, what comes up? Or what comes up if you just type in horror book? I always think of horror when I'm talking to you, Mark.
I wonder why. It has nothing to do with all the spells behind me, right?
Nah, I don't think so. So do the research. But this is a good trick, guys. Are you ready? Write it down. Pen out. Do it incognito mode. Okay? So when you go to that online retailer, then what you do is you do an incognito mode, because if you don't, it takes the cookies and the history of every other search you've done, anything you do online, and it puts that into play. When you do it incognito mode, it doesn't have any of your history, so it's organic. What comes up organically when you do that search? That's how you can see what the real bestsellers are, what the real bots are that make them all come up on top. That's how you do it first. Go incognito.
Okay, so you don't mean that I'm going to put a mask on and hide beneath the blanket as I'm browsing the internet. You're talking about like a privacy setting in your browser, right? Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure.
So like
okay.
Yes.
So
although if you do put the mask on and everything, just send me a picture.
Okay, I will. Excellent.
Okay. So in Google Chrome, that's the one that I use most of the time.
Right.
In Google Chrome, if you're looking at your screen, on the top right-hand corner, there's 3 little dots. If you click on those 3 little dots, one of the options that comes up is open incognito window. That's all you do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to be able to take questions from the floor very soon, but I want to talk. You help authors in other ways as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other things that you do to support and help authors?
Sure. So one of the things I do is I help authors get into the media. So we've kind of talked about that a little bit, about how it might be hard for you to reach out to a show producer and say, hey, I'm the best. So it's really easy for me to go, hey, Mark's the best, right? So that's one thing that I do, is I help be that voice piece for other people in booking them on shows. And if that's not something that fits in your budget, so what I always tell people is look at your budget. You have a time budget and you have a money budget. If you have more money than time, you can hire more things out. If you have more time than money, you need the training to do it. So I can help train people in how to do things themselves. And in addition to media things, you also have ads. So doing online ads with the online retailers, but also in social media. And I think one of the mistakes I do see with social media is people don't actually understand how to do ads in social media, because there's more ways to do it than just through boosting a post, for example. So actually getting out there and doing some ads is something I can help them with. Building a launch platform. So you have a plan, more than just my book's coming out and I'm going to blast the whole internet and everyone's going to buy my book. So you need a plan, you need a schedule, and those are all things that I can help you do. So making sure that you have the resources that you need to execute that plan is another thing. So I can help you kind of guide through, like, for example, book reviews. I'm a book reviewer myself, so I review them on my website, thebookbreak.com. And I also do editorial reviews for people. So they can put that in their editorial review sections or on the back of their book or things like that. I do reviews or book recommendation segments. That's another thing. So right now, actually right before I got on with you, Mark, I was doing a Mother's Day gift book recommendation segment. So those are things that when I'm doing these, I do them at least once a month. If you have a book that you want me to consider to recommend, and that's going to be a little bit different than a review. It's something that I'm recommending because, like, for example, maybe I don't like a gory zombie story, but as a professional in the industry, I can look at it and say, this is a great book for someone that does like gory zombie stories, right? And that's probably something I'm going to recommend in my October book recommendation segment, for example. So helping you to get on TV. And you just reminded me of a question I didn't fully answer. How can you get on TV without having to be the person on TV? This is it, guys. You get someone else to talk about your book.
You
So,
mean you
like,
get Melissa to go and talk about my book?
Yes, that's it. So, like, when I do the book recommendation segments, I focus on 3 books. You can't see me. There's my 3 books. And and I am recommending those books for you, right? So I'm getting on there and I'm saying, here's what the book is, here's what it's about. I think this would make a great book for the XYZ reader. And that's one thing that you can do, is you get someone else to talk about your book. So anyways, there's a few things I can help you with.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you. I want to go back to the importance of reviews. Now, I think authors
Oh, yes.
understand reader reviews are important, but these editorial reviews, what are the different ways you can use them? I think you shared a few already, but what are some of the other ways that those reader reviews or those editorial, or I guess not, what would it, professional reviews? Is that what they are?
Yeah, professional
Okay.
reviews. Yes. So there's a lot of different options for professional reviews. Some of the more wide known ones are like Kirkus reviews or Blue Ink, Indie Reader, self-publishing reviews, The Book Break. So these are these are some of the ones that you might think of: Publishers Weekly, stuff like that. So the first thing you need to know is that when you are submitting your book to be reviewed for these companies, you need to do it significantly in advance. So one of the things that you can do with them is put them on the back of your book. If you get a great review, then you can put it on the front of your book. And that is really useful because this is a person that is looking at this book specifically through the eyes of a reviewer. So that might hold more weight than your John Doe friend that's also an author, or your John Doe friend that's your neighbor, right? Those quotes are really great to have on your book too. So don't stop doing that. I mean, please keep doing those, right? But if you get professional reviews, sometimes those hold a little bit more weight in people's eyes. And those companies now advertise for you. So let's say you get in the top 10% of Kirkus reviews. Quarterly, Kirkus puts out a book's worth reading, and only the top 10% of the books can even be considered for that list. Indie Reader, they work with a company called Edelweiss, who helps get your book out there all over the place. So I had a book that I was working with for one of my clients, and he got an excellent review with Indie Reader, and they provide a little sticker you can put on your book that basically says you're the best ever, and it helps everyone to know how great your book is. Blue Ink does that too. So you can get a starred review, and then they'll put you out there. So like with Indie Reader, for example, when my client did that one, they put them out in the best books that came out in March. So if your book is really great, you have a really good opportunity to do that. Now I'm going to say something that might not be nice.
Uh-oh.
Forgive me already.
Is it my hair?
Dang it, Mark. Okay, so if you are not confident in your book, be careful which professional reviewers you're sending it to, because this is something you need to consider. For the majority of these professional reviewers, you have to pay for those reviews, but you're not paying for a positive review. You are simply paying for an honest review. And this is why, if you're not confident in your book, you may not want to spend the $200 to get that professional review if it might come back bad. So one of the courtesies that all of these professional review companies do is they will send you the review first before they publish it. And you have the opportunity to say, no, thank you, please don't publish that. And I do the same thing. I give the authors the opportunity to see the reviews first before I publish them. And that gives them that chance of saying yes or no if it was a paid review. So if it's not a paid review, then you don't get the opportunity. But if it's a paid review, you do. And you can also use these reviews when you're promoting yourself. So for example, if you want to get into libraries, if you get a good review with in the catalog that librarians use to order, which means now they're promoting your book to librarians. And if you get a good review, they are much more likely to bring you in. In my area here in Utah, if I can show them a Kirkus review, Blue Ink review, Indie Reader, any of these companies, they will automatically put it in. All I have to do is say, hey, look at these great reviews. You should bring this book into your library. And they go, you're right, Melissa, I should. And then they bring it in. So these are great ways for you to get your book out there. On online retailers, you can list those reviews. Again, it gives you more credibility. When you're pitching media, use these reviews. It gives you more credibility. And when you're applying for things like a BookBub featured deal, you tell them about your professional reviews. You have a much better chance of being chosen for that featured deal if you have professional reviews. So there's lots of ways that you can use these. And if you're paying for it, guys, use it as much as you can. And even if you happen to get one like through Publishers Weekly that you didn't pay for, use it. Only if it's good, obviously.
Awesome. Thank you. That was fantastic. I want to go back to, so Guy says, author brand check, great info. And I want to go back to author brand because we talked about the author brand and the way that you look in person, right? We talked about James and Jim, the hair and the things like, and I think Jonathan Maybury always, I always see him in Hawaiian shirts. That's part of his.
Yes, I was just going to say floral shirts. Yeah.
Yeah, those shirts. And then what are some other brand considerations an author should think about apart from the way that they dress?
Okay, so apart from the way that you dress, which is a big one, the next thing is consistency in your online appearance. So for example, if you have a website and you have Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, these things all need to look similar. So take the banner, for example, that you use in your social media. So maybe you have, the cover photo that you have on your author page on Facebook. It's really cool if you can use that same cover with your Twitter account, with your LinkedIn account, with your YouTube account, right? So have consistency across the board and try to have consistency in your name or handle on social media. So for example, the book break, right? So if you go online and you do a search for the book break, I am the book break everywhere across the board. Now, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the social medias already had somebody that had taken the book break, so I had to say the book break one.
I think
because
that was on
I'm
Twitter.
number one.
Yeah.
So maybe it has to be like Mark Leslie one instead, right? Or Mark to Draft, whatever your name is, try to have it and try to have it make sense, guys. So sometimes I see people come up with really weird names for their handles. Don't do that. Don't do that. You want to make it as easy as possible for people to find you, right? Another thing to think about for authors, if you intend on writing more than one book, you may want to consider, don't use the name of your book as your brand. Okay. So if you're ever going to write more than just one book, your website, you don't want to call it mybook.com, right? Whatever your title is. Because why? Because you're probably going to write more than one book. Now, that's not to say that you can't have the website mybook.com, right? You can do these really cool things where you forward websites and make them face the same place. So it could be mybook.com and myauthorname.com, and you can point them to the exact same place so people can find you, whether they search you through your book or whether they search you through your name. So make sure that you're using consistency. Now, the next thing to think about is genre hopping. I feel very strongly about genre hopping. If you are a middle grade fantasy writer, okay, and now you want to switch to being an erotica romance writer, your middle grade fantasy fans are not following you to romance. So keep that in mind and think about that with your newsletters and your websites. Basically, what you have to do when you genre hop is you have to create an entirely new brand, an entirely new following. Anne Rice did this. She tried to switch from one genre to another, and it didn't work. She lost a ton of people. So keep that in mind. Until you are huge, genre hopping can be difficult. Now, it's not to say that you can't do it. It is just to say that keep in mind your fans won't necessarily follow you. So you're going to have to create a whole new fan base. Don't take your newsletter for your erotica people and try to move them to middle grade fantasy. They're not following you. So keep consistency. Now that I just said that, I just realized that Mark writes nonfiction books and horror books.
It's good. And I have a name you can't spell or pronounce.
Right.
So no, I understand. It's do as I say, not as I do. That's the way I like to help teach people.
Exactly. So. But you're a little different because you work with authors that are reading your nonfiction stuff. So, but just keep in mind, keep consistency across the board, and think about who you are and what you write, and make sure that people know what to expect from you. Because at the end of the day, if a fan falls in love with you, then they read your next book and it's not edited as well, or your cover sucks, they're not going to be happy. So be consistent.
That is awesome. So that kind of leads more back to something we talked about a little bit earlier. Is I'm sure you have seen countless mistakes that authors have made. What are some of the other mistakes, either mistakes that you've seen that could be avoidable, or potentially something that that you wish authors would just know more of? Okay.
One of the things that I see a lot, and it makes me really sad, is when an author, I'm trying to think how to say this, when an author doesn't know the genre that they're writing in. So if you want to be a romance writer, you need to read romance. You need to understand the genre that you're writing in. And if you don't understand it, you may not be able to write it well. So if you write action books, awesome, read about it. And now I've heard some authors say, I don't want to read other people's books because I'm afraid that their idea might accidentally leak into my head and come out in my books. Okay, I can see that is a legitimate fear. So you don't need to read about the same type. So for example, if you write sci-fi and you write specifically about aliens, when you're afraid that aliens are going to come into your head when you're writing your book, then maybe read a little bit of a different kind of sci-fi, but make sure that you understand the genre that you're writing in. Because I have seen over and over again, somebody try to write in a genre that they don't read and they miss the mark. So either the romance is so low because they don't ever read romance. So like the sci-fi part of the story is great, but the romance part of the story is not great. And I have to go back and tell them, you need to either fix this or take it out. Because I'm looking at it as a marketable book. I'm not looking at it as, is this a story that I want to read every night? Although I am, so it's a piece of it. I'm not looking at it for grammatical errors or spelling or anything like that. I'm looking at it, does the story work? Is it well developed? So that's something to think about. Another thing that I see that kills a lot of books is bad editing, meaning you never got it edited. And this is a hard one. When I find an author that hasn't had an editor, it's really hard to convince them at first that they need one. So if that's you, I am telling you now, you need an editor. I don't care if you got straight A's in your writing classes, or you were a journalist, or you are an editor. You still need an editor. And so that's another one. Beta readers. Ooh, I love talking about beta readers. So when I talk about a beta reader, I'm not talking about your spouse or your mom or your best friend. I'm talking about somebody that actually knows the genre you write in and that would read that kind of a book, and more importantly, will give you real and honest feedback. So if your mom is like my mom, she gives me real and honest feedback. So I don't have to worry if my mom hates something, she will tell me. Now, at the same time, she doesn't want to hurt my feelings, right? And now that I think about this, I wonder if my mom's watching. But anyway, so make sure that it's someone that's going to give you real and honest feedback, but that knows it, right? So if you are a horror writer and you try to give your book to somebody who's never read horror before, they might not have the best kind of feedback for you. So make sure it's someone that knows the genre that you write in and someone that will give you honest feedback. So look
Cool.
for that with beta readers.
Awesome. And I'm going to slip in one final question that comes from Carol. Carol's asking, how would I find professional reviewers for books in a small niche?
Okay, good question. So this is one of the things that's really cool about these professional review companies is they have tons of reviewers. So they will give your book to a reviewer in your niche. So for example, if you write a specific religious book that is to one religion, right? So let's say you're writing a Buddhist book, for example, they will have a reviewer that understands Buddhism. And that's going to be the reviewer that's going to read your book. And that's the great thing with these kinds of companies is that they do have multiple reviewers. So same thing with me. I'm not the only person that reviews books at the Book Break. And I ask all of my reviewers what genres they read. And I'll ask them to read books in their genre. So any of these big professional review companies, they will be able to help you with a small niche. Now, if you are looking for another kind of professional review, like a media person, for example, you want a journalist or someone from a TV show, make sure that you are finding the person that is in that niche. So if you're writing a lifestyle type book, find the person that writes about that. So self-help, find somebody that knows that. Now, I don't know what your particular niche is, but what you do is with professional review companies, you're covered. If you want something more than that, look for a show or a book or a magazine or a newspaper that focuses on that and go after them. But everyone, give your reviewers a lot of time. So if you are doing a professional review, plan on giving a month to look at it. And I know that's really hard to hear, but it really is months.
Cool. Thank you so much. Well, Melissa,
Yeah.
thank you for all of the amazing advice. Please let listeners and viewers know where they can find out more about you and check out some of the great things that you're doing.
So yeah, thebookbreak.com is where you can go. I have some book reviews on there. I have book recommendations. I am actually going live on TV in about an hour. So where I'm giving my Mother's Day gift book recommendations. And on there is my contact information, so you can find me through that. Otherwise, you can always email info@thebookbreak.com, info@thebookbreak.com, and I'll get back to you. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Look for The Book Break. And Melissa Dalton Martinez, if you even just Google Melissa Dalton Martinez, I'll come up everywhere too. So just use my name, my full name, not like a piece of it. Otherwise, other people come up, not me.
Awesome. Well, Melissa, thank you again so much for the fantastic advice and best of luck on the
Yeah,
next show that you're about to do.
thank you.